back to Comic Book Wednesdays, a somewhat weekly series where we talk about comic books. We're your hosts. I'm Ian.
I'm Al.
And I'm Shane.
With a special guest of L tonight. Good luck differentiating the two letters.
Yay! Because Lord, as we have enough trouble with it as on our own. So we are jumping into a new book, Watchmen by Alan Moore, uh, art by Dave Gibbons. I think there's an additional credit here that I'm missing. Um, but yeah, so the way we're breaking this down is it's in. We all have the actual book. So there's chapters. I believe each chapter is released as an individual issue at the time of release. So we're doing the first three tonight. Well, let's start. Elle, your impressions. This is your first time with the story, right?
First time in comic book form, where we've loved the movie for quite some time. And on that note, our impressions are that they did a great job with the film adaptations, but the book's kind of bad in a weird way. So the emphasis on words all throughout, like bolded words that come throughout, just really throw off the flow of reading for this one. And granted, I'll give some credit. We come from more of the manga side of reading, which I don't think has as much of that, but it's almost like you're just emphasizing random words in a sentence at times, and it really throws off my ability to read it. But it's still the story we love, and I love getting all the little caveats in here.
It's completely fair. It's something as a comic book reader I've never really noticed because there'll be times where an author will do that in comics and sometimes it makes sense, other times it doesn't.
Yeah, like when the cops are talking at the beginning over the murder of the comedian. There's sometimes where it's like, oh yeah, you're talking about the emphasis of the murder or whatever, and then just you throw in cigarettes with emphasis. I don't think they really do that, but some of them are really weird and off-putting. I love seeing Rorschach in all of his glory, mask and not though.
Oh, absolutely.
It's fun watching him walk through all the different panels.
The paneling too. I think Watchmen was the first one that does this whole almost 3x3 for 9 panels almost every page, except for the big ones that could take up 3 or 2. So it's very unique to Watchmen, or at least it was.
Oh, interesting.
I didn't know that.
No, okay, yeah, looking back through it and flipping through, I can see that that's the majority of the case. I hadn't really noticed.
Alex, this is your first time with the book too. I want to hear your thoughts.
So far I'm enjoying it. I mean, the first two chapters were definitely I enjoyed better or more than the third chapter. The third chapter was kind of I didn't.
It's a little dry.
It was a little dry, and the whole telling of the book
Black.
that the kid was reading on the side
The Black
was kind
Freighter.
of.
Oh my goodness, that was horribly disorienting because trying to read two stories side by side without actually having the context, if you've read whatever the book reference you were talking about, I'm sure it's great and plays in wonderfully, but without having read it, ow.
Yeah,
it was interesting.
Tough. And that doesn't stop. That continues.
Ah, wonderful. Maybe we'll know the next one.
Yeah, I think the Black Freighter it's written for Watchmen. I don't think it's a real comic, or at least it wasn't at the time of writing. I think since it's been published.
Oh. How interesting.
Yeah, Shane, I haven't heard from you.
No, you're good. I made that little sound because I was just digging and fell right into a cave and almost died because there was a witch there and I fell right on top of her head.
It's poisoned. It's fun time.
It's alright. They're all sleeping now, so I can talk. I definitely agree with Al. So, the first two chapters I really enjoyed. The third definitely was a little bit dry, unfortunately. One of the things I did kind of notice, and this is just history analytical brain kind of kicking in here, because I have a lot of sticky notes in this book. Every time they talk about the comedian's death, it's always in a red panel.
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is just like to highlight that, his death was, bloody and gory and going over all of that. But they're also doing something that I find really interesting is that whenever the comedian has spoken or like they're talking about him, they talk about the work that he did with Vietnam, and historically that was the rise of communism, and that was the reason we entered the war was we had to beat the evil communists. Well, spoiler alert, we lost, and we just don't like to talk about it.
Ha.
And then with the Cold War, again, it was this, we have to go after the Reds because communism. So I just find it really interesting that they highlight him
Oh.
with all of the things that he's done, while also in almost every panel, it's a red coloration.
Oh, we hadn't even thought about it that way. Coming from the manga background, we don't see quite as much color. So it was a stark difference, and the whole swath of everything feels really washed out and bleak in a color-esque sense.
Hmm.
But they do good job at doing gosh, the element you were just talking about, whatever you would call that in artistic formalities of like talking about the dead man in red and chasing after a red menace, because all of those panels are quite vibrantly red in like 1 to 6 ways.
Yeah.
Absolutely, that's a good point.
So that was kind of the first thing that like highlighted me, and then Elle, with what you were saying, like comparing this to the movie, I can definitely see right bits because like I read this a long time ago. It's
Mm-hmm.
been several, like back when I lived in an entire different part of Colorado a long time ago. Um, Seeing how they just copy pasted scenes directly from this to put into the film, I
It's
am really
fantastic.
happy.
I did note, however, that they had to really tone down Rorschach, because I like Rorschach in the movie a lot as kind of an anti-hero, someone you're not supposed to like, but in terms of an anti-hero who's stepping forward, done
Hmm.
wonderfully. He's a lot more fucked in this book.
Oh, he's
And
a
I
bit of
can
a
see
fuck, yeah.
I can see why they could not just translate all of that straight to the book. You can't just walk into a bar and break people's fingers because they make a joke in your general direction, but
Right,
like
right.
that's what the heroes of our world do, or at least the heroes of this world.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Uh, um, Also, just to kind of add to a little what you were saying, I think it's fascinating now that we're seeing like it's like a parallel like history because with the inclusion of Doctor Manhattan in this world, the United States has beaten Vietnam. I think in canon it becomes a state eventually. Oddly enough, um,
Oh, weird.
yeah,
Very strange.
very strange. And also like the Cold War has escalated. You would think that like the inclusion of Doctor Manhattan might even like stop the Soviet war machine. Well, it doesn't. It escalates it even further to the point where like the whole like I don't know. The cover of my hardcover book is the Doomsday Clock as it's like ticking ever closer to midnight. And it's it's really
And the
fascinating.
start of every chapter, I think,
Yes, you're right.
has
Hmm.
been. Are they actually getting closer? No, I think they're. At least the first 2 chapters, or 2 and 3, are sitting at 10 minutes till midnight.
Yeah, I
It
think
actually
eventually it
reminds
does get
me
closer.
of something a professor once told me in one of his lectures. And, he had said he was like, when on the beaches of Normandy, this isn't accurate, but with how wars go, you could picture this being true. And he said on the beaches of Normandy, you have Germans firing against the Americans, looking at the barrage of troops landing, coming to kill them. And, they said, don't worry, God is with us. And then as the, boats started coming onto the beaches, going after the Germans, something the Americans said was, don't worry, we have God on our side. And like, with what you were just saying about it ramping up the Soviets, it's always this proof of like, okay, well, if the Americans have Dr. Manhattan, I could really see that being a motivation of like, we still have to prove we're better because of this reason.
That's fair.
Even though everyone's got nuclear warheads and a man who can literally just rewrite reality, we gotta be better. Till his girlfriend walks out and he disappears, and Those nuclear
Oh,
projections were pretty bleak.
They were pretty bleak.
It was
I mean,
most
that
of the
entire
East
panel.
Coast. Let's see if I can find it.
Yeah, it was
Nope,
starting with
that's too far.
Washington, going through the east, and then I
There it
think
is.
hitting, blowing into New Mexico and Mexico with the nuclear winter, like the not the
Yep,
winter, the
like almost
wind.
all the
Blech.
way up to Canada and just all the way over into Texas is just fucking radioactive waste symbols.
Right. They were at first I feel like they started off being like, oh, it's fine, just Germany and England, and then it's slowly like, oh shit,
Oh,
yeah,
Oh, if this happens, everybody gonna die.
everybody's
Yeah.
fucked, yeah,
Yeah, that was really interesting watching the newspaper guy, the salesman who has the kid reading next to him the whole time, talk about his views on world and how newscasters and news people are always up to date, know what's going on,
Mhm.
and just shooting the shit and not giving a care for anything, and then sees that the Russian front invades the
and
Middle East and just sits down and goes, "Well, we're fucked, everybody. Go
yeah,
have a nice time with your ma, kid."
yeah, gives him his hat, gives him the book,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
We actually had a unique opportunity in college with that because our physics professor was in college doing his studies for physics at about the time of the I guess Cold War where the standoff of nukes was happening. So
mm,
as a
oh, the Cuban
physicist,
Missile Crisis.
uh that doesn't sound right for this one, but this one is not a history buff. It was more, for what we took away from it, the fact that the man was studying physics and the implications of nuclear fallout while the threat was literally on the horizon.
That must have been fucking wild.
Oh,
just
yeah.
living in that time, which
Mm-hmm.
probably just absolutely nuts.
And having the extra understanding of what the fallout was capable of and the absolute devastation and looking at it and going, "Oh my goodness, I just have to go back to school tomorrow. Got a test."
The wheel of capitalism just ever spins.
Right.
Oof.
Um,
Speaking of that one too, and the different ideologies in here, there is an exemplary amount of overt just Nazism and fascist symbols and the ideologies pervading throughout this, and it was kind of really hard to pick up. I think it was a second or third page that had a swastika. Let me see if I can find where it ended up being. And just drawing parallels to where we kind of find ourselves in the States right now with the ideologies rising up and being a part of groups that are they tend to hate is a little disconcerting to read it from an alternate history standpoint. But also looking at just how violent everything in this one is.
it's pretty bad as far as this book's concerned. Violence, it's just, but like I feel like it's a really good use of commentary that even rings true today. It's kind of scary, to be
Yeah,
honest, but
it's I do appreciate that it's not like dumbed down, hidden, or just like nuanced or subtle. The authors here definitely are saying like, yeah, there's fascists walking the fucking street, guys.
yeah,
Sure, these superheroes might beat people up, but also these are people who just go around and murder. So like, not that it's good, because I don't think anything we've read in this so far has been like an endorsement of any of these ideologies, but
oh no, uh, yeah. Alan Moore is very serious about what he wrote. Like he give it's he writes with a purpose, which
hmm
is um, unfortunate for him that they like have tried to like extend his work and just to make money off of it because they've done an HBO show, they put a second sequel comic out, they put prequel comics out, all of which don't have his name on it,
Oh
and
wow.
it's kind of unfortunate in my opinion because I feel like this book is, as far as like political commentaries go and just comic books in general, it's probably one of the greatest that exists. Um, that
Yeah,
said,
I can't wait to
oh
see how it continues to develop.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, I know because if it's gonna copy paste half of it over, it's that gives you some insight onto where it's going. But
There are some small changes with
oh,
from the
for
movie,
sure,
but
and that's what
for
we're
the
excited to see. Because one of the things we recall well is how Alan Moore is doesn't appreciate when anyone comes up and says like, "Oh, Rorschach's my favorite character." It's kind of a great. You can walk away now.
yeah.
You don't get that impression from the movie so much, I feel like, because they had to tone down some of Rorschach's violent tendencies.
Oh,
It's more the
absolutely.
nuance. It's there, you're aware of it in the lore, but you're not getting to see it or really walk with him quite as much as he doesn't really give a shit about the people he very clearly doesn't have good opinions on.
No, everybody is scum. He's done trying to save. He's more just a vengeful vigilante at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Um, we've talked a lot about like our political or like the insights of like the tones and themes of the book. I just kind of want to hear like what parts did you enjoy reading? Did you get a chuckle at a certain points where you're like, oh shit, that's awesome? Just or just really appreciated the art on the page. El, we can start with you again.
We really do love watching Rorschach's mask change, and that's one of the main reasons we do like him is just seeing the ink blots changing all the time
Mm.
and having the contrast of who he is outside of the mask. Um, the range of facial expression he has and panders to when he is in civilian clothing is incredible, almost like watching his ink blots move around, but it really feels like a facade even if he is in civilian clothing or uniform. So I love watching that come around.
I like that you mentioned him in civilian because like the first time if you're reading this for the first time, you don't know that's him until like the end of the book, or
Hmm.
like
Hmm.
so that's
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was him or not.
That's why we're trying not to just like outwardly say who it is in case we haven't gotten there for any of the readers, because we happen to know that just from the lore before and we love seeing him around. But who is he? He's a dude who's everywhere, but where is he?
mm,
What's he doing?
what's he thinking? What's his mind state?
Scum.
Yeah.
Let's
Um,
see. Was there anything else that really stood out to this one? We have in our edition of the book excerpts from an autobiography that the first Night Owl wrote. We read through those, and they're great for world building. But as some autobiographies end up being, they do feel kind of rambly and not really integral to the story in any way or capacity. It just sort of helps build the world, but it also has a lot of writer's bias in it. So you can tell just even looking at it that that's still this Minuteman who's talking, who is still maybe regrets some things in his older time, because I think it said he's writing it in like his 60s ish,
mm,
but is still very much in a hard on for putting his underwear over his head and running out there and beating up people who don't agree with civility.
it's it's kind of how I would expect someone from that generation to be.
Ooh, that's a good point.
Like, I
Yeah, that
wonder.
it's
I'm
we had
sorry.
certainly had to take a step back and recognize the times on this one because time is really relative and doesn't work in our brain well. And even though there are so many dates and named locations and historical events in here, it's
Mm,
still weird to step back and be in the mindset of an entirely different generation. So,
yeah, there's
and it's
certain
fascinating.
things that like I think kids from today's generation, when they're growing up and they'll read this book, some things will definitely escape them just because of the time.
Mm-hmm.
Themes overall, I think, will stick, but
Hmm.
the book itself, it ages. I mean, as all things do, you know.
Of course.
Yeah.
Um, but for me, I think as far as like, I really like the flashbacks of Donald Blake's death. Like as the you see the walking like Rorschach is like doing his investigation. Like I like that beginning part. It always really sticks out for me.
I
And
have been
figuring everything
enjoying
out.
that.
It's good.
Especially
Um,
around the funeral where everyone's having a solitary moment and thinking about their most impressionable moments of the comedian. It's very well done.
absolutely. Um, and again, I just can't help not to think of the movie. Like it just translates so well. Alex, did you have any parts that you liked that you wanted to
That was
talk about?
actually what I was gonna say too as well. I really did enjoy, the flashbacks of how he, made an impression on the other characters, and there was a lot of good information there.
What do you think of the comedian, Alex? Just in general, do you see we see a lot there from his flashbacks? Just
He mostly seemed like a piece of shit, but um, I don't know. I don't know. He seemed like he could have been an interesting character had he had more depth in the book, but I don't know if we're still gonna get some. So that's my initial impression.
that's fair. That's fair. How about you, Shane?
Um, wait for that specific question, or like things that I found interesting.
More about overall in the book, what you found interesting.
Overall, what I found interesting. So I have to go back to the art every time they use Doctor Manhattan, and one of the things that I had, like marked off with a little sticky note was at the very end of what is this? So I'm just checking the chapter. Very end of chapter 3, where he's sitting alone, um, and he's just staring at this photo, and like I really enjoy how they not only just did the art and did like space and him just kind of like looking up into this vastness, because the entirety of this, like the at the end of that panel was very much like how he's not human, he doesn't care, he doesn't give a shit, and there he is just sitting there like his pose, his body language is very much a what do I do? Because if he wasn't human, he wouldn't be carrying that photo of like his previous love, and so he just kind of like looks up like he's lost. And I really enjoy how they conveyed that, because for the most part he does act like he doesn't have any emotions or that emotions are beyond him, but it does convey some of that in that panel.
The use of facial expressions overall has been very well in doing that. Dr.
Yes.
Manhattan certainly has some, though his are a lot more. I think because of his perception of time, he is less present in any given moment, but you can certainly see when he is present in a moment, like when everyone's accusing him of causing cancer to everyone around him, and he
Right.
gets
Yeah, it's
angry.
not
Like,
something you can ignore.
No,
no,
he's
you certainly see him get emotional to that.
yeah. I mean, like you totally see like at times he's staring off into space, but like you can tell like they did a good job at like expressing his face whenever something crazy is happening to him, something that's jarring. It kind of brings him back, you know. Um, and
Standing there pondering after he watched the comedian kill a woman he impregnated in Vietnam, and then standing at the funeral with that same pose, just being like, "Her."
right, and like it
Villager
leads me to
noises. It's
think that
villager
like
noises in his brain.
it leads me to think that like the way he sees time, he was standing there staring at that woman's death as he like was coming to terms with the comedian's death at the same time.
Hmm.
Ooh,
He was in all
that's a good
moments.
way to look at
We'll,
it.
we'll admit we couldn't just leave chapter 3 on the note of him staring off there, because when I flipped the panel, I saw that it carried on with him a little bit more. And I won't go into detail on it, but the way it is written that he perceives time in the next like couple pages is fascinating and wonderful.
Yeah, I can't wait to talk about that next week. That's
Oh yeah.
gonna be fun.
But no, I
Uh,
think that definitely is the same in what you were saying, is with how he perceives time. He can be anywhere in time that he has been. He may not be aware of which present moment he's in, but he can certainly step back into the past and see forward into the future.
yeah, absolutely. Um, there, I was talking about sequel comics. So there's a sequel comic called Doomsday Clock where he interacts more with the DC universe as a whole.
Hmm.
Um, and he's frightened of Superman because the furthest he can look into the future is right before Superman fucking punches him. So he
Oh.
he doesn't know what happens. Either like Superman kills him, or he destroys all the universe. So he's not quite sure what. And I'll just leave it at that. But Doomsday Clock is an interesting read. I still don't think Alan Moore would appreciate it, but as a fan, I enjoyed it. But yeah, I mean, we could honestly
Appreciate it as much as those cold beans Rorschach tears into.
I like it better this way.
I love how he just shows up to people's houses, eats their food, and goes thanks, and walks out.
Yeah, so nice. Much gentleman. Such wow.
It's something that him and Link have in common.
And instead of the hi, he's the It's like Link and Lunk. Night and day difference.
Yeah, we honestly could probably continue talking about these comics for like hours because there's just so much you can like unwrap.
Oh yeah, I'm sure the history brain and Shane over there just goes absolutely wonkers at all the references in here.
Yeah.
I've been holding myself back. I'm not gonna lie.
Well, let's
well, what's your most noticeable one? How about that? What would you like to? What tickles your fancy the best?
What tickles my fancy? All right, let me just. I'll pick one. Give me just a sec.
We'll finish on your note there, Shane. So.
Okay.
Let's make it juicy.
Make it juicy.
Maybe toasty. Or soggy.
This
This isn't exactly a good timeline.
Alright, let's see. There was one I blocked off recently. It was in chapter 2. Give me a sec.
The enemy controls 2 objectives. Bravo secure.
So, a little bit of commentary on the current state of the world, but this was in chapter 2, right after that moment where the comedian shot that woman, the pregnant Vietnamese woman.
Mm-hmm.
And he says, I mean, if we'd lost this war, I don't know, I think it might have driven us a little crazy, as a country. And I really think that too, like, parallels, because, that was something that, like, as this comic progresses, and as he's talking about this, like even in the next couple of panels, it shows the immediate victory, and that victory was only possible with the help of the superheroes, and more importantly, someone who calls himself Dr. Manhattan, which is a reference, of course, to the Manhattan Project and our reliance on nuclear weapons, and the fact that we didn't have to use any, we just sent a literal god there to do our bidding. Now, if you were to take that and compare that to us just throwing a nuke at whatever problem we have and then immediately claiming victory, that's what it's paralleling, because that Vietnam was something that we could not win. And we refused to ever say that we lost, but it is something arguably that one of our biggest failures.
I wonder, like, what the possibility was of throwing a nuke at them was.
I'm sure it was talked about. I mean, we like to talk about how after it was used in Japan that it was something that like we weren't going to ever do ever again, and that we would only do so if provoked on by the Russians. But it's something not often talked about, that almost every like military tries to use its biggest weapon. Like, it's always the argument of who has the biggest stick. And in this comic, the biggest stick is Dr. Manhattan, aka like the symbol of the nuke.
Dick.
Yeah, no, sure, that too. Like, he's just a reference for.
Come on, God shows up on the battlefield in bright blue skin and a waggling dick and eradicates your front line, and you don't think it's bad? Uh-huh.
Well, that, I think it's, it lends more into, how can we spin this in a way that makes us win? And I mean, look, when he left, they immediately went after, his former lover, and they were like, well, he just up and left because he decided to do that, and we don't know where he is, we don't know what he's going to do. Like, they were panicking because this was the biggest weapon they had. and now they're freaking out because they know that they can't control him. He's been doing everything that he wants to do. They just like to pretend that it's what
It was
that
in
their
line with
interests are
their
aligned.
interests long enough that they thought they
Yes.
could maintain control.
Exactly, yeah. And so I just find that really interesting that like we're going to see more of those comparisons, and I really enjoy that because he's taking like Alan Moore is taking such a stance on this to show like not only is with the superheroes and everything that's going on with their lives, but just the world itself in this alternate history. I really really love his world building because he's spending such a large chunk of it explaining everything, and I enjoy that.
Indeed.
Fair, fair, fair. Well, I appreciate you bringing that last bit of information there. It's a good way to end it here, I think. So we're going to continue next week. We'll get into a little bit of the timey-wimey nonsense of Dr. Manhattan as we read chapters 4, 5, and 6. So appreciate everybody listening, and sorry for the god-awful gameplay that I'm recording at this moment.
It's okay, it's better than us. We're just standing at a farm staring at the glass of 1,000 people being wrought forward into a trident as it stabs them in the brain. You know, war crimes, the typical Minecraft day.
yeah, yeah, sounds worse than the literal shooting that I'm doing.
Oof.
But yeah, subscribe, like, comment, interact. Actively comments at Al, asking him to talk more because when he talks, it's fun. But thanks again, everybody. I'm Ian.
I'm Al.
And I'm Shane.
With Elle as the guest, and we're happy to be here.
This was Comic Book Wednesdays. Good night, everybody.
Have a good one.